Sutra of the Musalla. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 472. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, once I came riding a she-ass when I had just attained the age of puberty. Allah's apostle was offering the prayer at Mina with no wall in front of him, and I passed in front of some of the row. There I dismounted and let my she-ass loose to graze and entered the row, and nobody objected to me about it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 473. Narrated by Ibn Umar, whenever Allah's apostle came out on Eid day, he used to order that a harba, a short spear, to be planted in front of him, as a sutra for his prayer, and then he used to pray facing it with the people behind him, and used to do the same while on a journey. After the Prophet, this practice was adopted by the Muslim rulers, who followed his traditions. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 474. Narrated by On bin Abi Juhayfa, I heard my father saying, the Prophet led us, and prayed a 2-rakat Zuhr prayer and then a 2-rakat Asr prayer at Al-Bayda with an ansa, planted, in front of him, as a sutra, while women and donkeys were passing in front of him, beyond that ansa. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 475. Narrated by Sal bin Said, the distance between the Musalla of Allah's apostle and the wall was just sufficient for a sheep to pass through. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 476. Narrated by Salama, the distance between the wall of the mosque and the pulpit was hardly enough for a sheep to pass through. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 477. Narrated by Abdullah, the Prophet used to get a harba planted in front of him, as a sutra, and pray behind it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 478. Narrated by On bin Abi Juhayfa, that he had heard his father saying, Allah's apostle came to us at midday and water was brought for his ablution. He performed ablution and led us in Zuhr and Asr prayers with an ansa planted in front of him, as a sutra, while women and donkeys were passing beyond it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 479. Narrated by Anas ibn Malik, whenever the Prophet went for answering the call of nature, I and another boy used to go after him with a staff, a stick, or an ansa and a tumbler of water, and when he finished from answering the call of nature we would hand that tumbler of water to him. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 480. Narrated by Abu Juhayfa, Allah's apostle came out at midday and offered a 2-rakat Zuhr and Asr prayers at Al-Bayda, and an ansa was planted in front of him, as a sutra. He performed ablution and the people took the remaining water left after his ablution and rubbed their bodies with it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 481. Narrated by Yazid bin al-Ubaid, I used to accompany Salama bin al-Aqwa and he used to pray behind the pillar which was near the place where the Qur'ans were kept. I said, O Abu Muslim, I see you always seeking to pray behind this pillar. He replied, I saw Allah's apostle always seeking to pray near that pillar. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 482. Narrated by Anas, I saw the most famous people amongst the companions of the Prophet hurrying towards the pillars at the Maghrib prayer before the Prophet came for the prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 483. Narrated by Ibn Umar, the Prophet entered the Kaaba along with Usama bin Zayd, Uthman bin Talha and Bilal, and remained there for a long time. When they came out, I was the first man to enter the Kaaba. I asked Bilal, where did the Prophet pray? Bilal replied, between the two front pillars. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 484. Narrated by Nafi, Abdullah bin Umar said, Allah's apostle entered the Kaaba along with Usama bin Zayd, Bilal, and Uthman bin Talha al-Hajabi and closed the door and stayed there for some time. I asked Bilal when he came out, what did the Prophet do? He replied, he offered prayer with one pillar to his left and one to his right and three behind. In those days the Kaaba was supported by 6 pillars. Malik said, there were 2 pillars on his, the Prophet's, right side. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 485. Narrated by Nafi, the Prophet used to make his she-camel sit across and he would pray facing it, as a sutra. I asked, what would the Prophet do if the she-camel was provoked and moved? He said, he would take its camel saddle and put it in front of him and pray facing its back part, as a sutra. And Ibn Umar used to do the same. This indicates that one should not pray except behind a sutra. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 486. Narrated by Aisha, do you make us, women, equal to dogs and donkeys? While I used to lie in my bed, the Prophet would come and pray facing the middle of the bed. I used to consider it not good to stand in front of him in his prayers. So I used to slip away slowly and quietly from the foot of the bed till I got out of my guilt. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 487. Narrated by Abu Sa'id, the Prophet said, what is ascribed to him in the following, see Hadith 488. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 488. Narrated by Abu Salah as-Saman, I saw Abu Sa'id al-Khudri praying on a Friday, behind something which acted as a sutra. A young man from Bani Abi Mu'ayt wanted to pass in front of him, but Abu Sa'id repulsed him with a push on his chest. Finding no alternative, he again tried to pass, but Abu Sa'id pushed him with a greater force. The young man abused Abu Sa'id and went to Marwan and lodged a complaint against Abu Sa'id, and Abu Sa'id followed the young man to Marwan, who asked him, O Abu Sa'id, what has happened between you and the son of your brother? Abu Sa'id said to him, I heard the Prophet saying, if anybody amongst you is praying behind something as a sutra and somebody tries to pass in front of him, then he should repulse him, and if he refuses, he should use force against him, for he is a Satan. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 489. Narrated by Busr bin said, that Zayd bin Khalid sent him to Abi Juhaym to ask him what he had heard from Allah's apostle about a person passing in front of another person who was praying. Abu Juhaym replied, Allah's apostle said, if the person who passes in front of another person in prayer knew the magnitude of his sin, he would prefer to wait for 40 days, months, or years, rather than to pass in front of him. Abu an-Nadr said, I do not remember exactly whether he said 40 days, months, or years. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 490. Narrated by Aisha, the things which annul the prayers were mentioned before me. They said, prayer is annulled by a dog, a donkey, and a woman, if they pass in front of the praying people. I said, you have made us, i.e. women, dogs. I saw the Prophet praying while I used to lie in my bed between him and the Qibla. Whenever I was in need of something, I would slip away, for I disliked to face him. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 491. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet used to pray while I was sleeping across in his bed in front of him. Whenever he wanted to pray witr, he would wake me up and I would pray witr. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 492. Narrated by Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, I used to sleep in front of Allah's apostle with my legs opposite his qibla, facing him, and whenever he prostrated, he pushed my feet and I withdrew them, and whenever he stood, I stretched them. Aisha added, in those days there were no lamps in the houses. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 493. Narrated by Aisha, the things which annual prayer were mentioned before me, and those were a dog, a donkey, and a woman. I said, you have compared us, women, to donkeys and dogs. By Allah! I saw the Prophet praying while I used to lie in my bed between him and the Qibla. Whenever I was in need of something, I disliked to sit and trouble the Prophet. So, I would slip away by the side of his feet. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 494. Narrated by Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, Allah's apostle used to get up at night and pray while I used to lie across between him and the Qibla on his family's bed. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 495. Narrated by Abu Qatada al-Ansari, Allah's apostle was praying and he was carrying Umama, the daughters of Zainab, the daughter of Allah's apostle, and she was the daughter of Az bin Rabi'a bin Abdus Hams. When he prostrated, he put her down, and when he stood, he carried her on his neck. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 496. Narrated by Ma'imunah bint al-Harith, my bed was beside the praying place, Musalla, of the Prophet, and sometimes his garment fell on me while I used to lie in my bed. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 497. Narrated by Ma'imunah, the Prophet used to pray while I used to sleep beside him during my periods, menses, and in prostrations his garment used to touch me. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 498. Narrated by Aisha, it is not good that you people have made us, women, equal to dogs and donkeys. No doubt I saw Allah's apostle praying while I used to lie between him and the Qibla, and when he wanted to prostrate, he pushed my legs and I withdrew them. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 9, Hadith number 499. Narrated by Amr bin Ma'imun, Abdullah bin Mas'udi said, while Allah's apostle was praying beside the Kaaba, there were some Quraysh people sitting in a gathering. One of them said, don't you see this, who does deeds just to show off? Who amongst you can go and bring the dung, blood, and the abdominal contents, intestines, etc., of the slaughtered camels of the family of so and so, and then wait till he prostrates and put that in between his shoulders? The most unfortunate amongst them, Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt, went, and brought them, and when Allah's apostle prostrated, he put them between his shoulders. The Prophet remained in prostration, and they laughed so much so that they fell on each other. A passerby went to Fatima, who was a young girl in those days. She came running, and the Prophet was still in prostration. She removed them and cursed upon the Quraysh on their faces. When Allah's apostle completed his prayer, he said, O Allah, take revenge on Quraysh. He said so thrice and added, O Allah, take revenge on Amr bin Hisham, Utbah bin Rabi'a, Shaiba bin Rabi'a, Al-Walid bin Utbah, Umayyah bin Khalaf, Uqba bin Abi Mu'ayt, and Umar bin al-Walid. Abdullah added, by Allah, I saw all of them dead in the battlefield on the day of Badr, and they were dragged and thrown in the Kalib, a well, at Badr. Allah's apostle then said, Allah's curse has descended upon the people of the Kalib, well. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 500. Narrated by Ibn Shihab, once Umar bin Abdul Aziz delayed the prayer, and Urwa bin Aziz Zubair went to him and said, Once in Iraq, al-Mughtar bin Shubi'a delayed his prayers and Abi Mas'ud al-Ansari went to him and said, O Mughira! What is this? Don't you know that once Gabriel came and offered the prayer, Fajr prayer, and Allah's apostle prayed too, then he prayed again, Zuhr prayer, and so did Allah's apostle and again he prayed, Asr prayers and Allah's apostle did the same, again he prayed, Maghrib prayer, and so did Allah's apostle and again prayed, Isha prayer, and so did Allah's apostle and, Gabriel, said, I was ordered to do so, to demonstrate the prayers prescribed to you. Umar, bin Abdul Aziz, said to Urwa, be sure of what you say. Did Gabriel lead Allah's apostle at the stated times of the prayers? Urwa replied, Bashir bin Abi Mas'ud narrated like this on the authority of his father. Urwa added, Aisha told me that Allah's apostle used to pray Asr prayer when the sunshine was still inside her residence, during the early time of Asr. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 501. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, once a delegation of Abdul Qais came to Allah's apostle and said, we belong to such and such branch of the tribe of Rabi and we can only come to you in the sacred months. Order us to do something good so that we may, carry out, take it from you and also invite to it our people whom we have left behind, at home. The Prophet said, I order you to do 4 things and forbid you from 4 things. The first 4 are as follows. 1. To believe in Allah. And then he explained it to them, i.e., to testify that none has the right to be worshipped but Allah and, Muhammad, is Allah's apostle. 2. To offer prayers perfectly. At the stated times. 3. To pay zakat. Obligatory charity. 4. To give me kumus. The other 4 things which are forbidden are as follows. 1. Dubba. 2. Hantam. 3. Makayat. 4. Nacheinander. All these are utensils used for the preparation of alcoholic drinks. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 502. Narrated by Jarir bin Abdullah, I gave the pledge of allegiance to Allah's apostle for to offer prayers perfectly, to pay zakat regularly, and to give good advice to every Muslim. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 503. Narrated by Shaykh, that he had heard Hudhaifa saying, once I was sitting with Umar and he said, who amongst you remembers the statement of Allah's apostle about the afflictions? I said, I know it as the Prophet had said it. Umar said, no doubt you are bold. I said, the afflictions caused for a man by his wife, money, children, and neighbor are expiated by his prayers, fasting, charity and by enjoining, what is good, and forbidding, what is evil. Umar said, I did not mean that but I asked about that affliction which will spread like the waves of the sea. Hudhaifa, said, O leader of the faithful believers, you need not be afraid of it as there is a closed door between you and it. Umar asked, will the door be broken or opened? I replied, it will be broken. Umar said, then it will never be closed again. I was asked whether Umar knew that door. I replied that he knew it as one knows that there will be night before the tomorrow morning. I narrated a hadith that was free from any misstatement. The subnarrator added that they deputed Masruq to ask Hudhaifa about the door. Hudhaifa said, the door was Umar himself. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 504. Narrated by Ibn Mas'ud, a man kissed a woman, unlawfully, and then went to the Prophet and informed him. Allah revealed, and offer prayers perfectly at the 2 ends of the day and in some hours of the night, i.e. the 5 compulsory prayers. Verily, good deeds remove, annul, The evil deeds, small sins, 11.114. The man asked Allah's apostle, "Is it for me?" He said, "It is for all my followers." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 505. Narrated by Abdullah, I asked the Prophet which deed is the dearest to Allah. He replied, to offer the prayers at their early stated fixed times. I asked, what is the next, in goodness? He replied, to be good and dutiful to your parents. I again asked, what is the next, in goodness? He replied, to participate in jihad, religious fighting, in Allah's cause. Abdullah added, I asked only that much, and if I had asked more, the Prophet would have told me more. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 506. Narrated by Abu Huraira, I heard Allah's Apostle saying, if there was a river at the door of any one of you and he took a bath in it 5 times a day, would you notice any dirt on him? They said, not a trace of dirt would be left. The Prophet added, that is the example of the 5 prayers with which Allah blots out, annuls, evil deeds. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 507. Narrated by Ghailan, Anas said, I do not find, nowadays, things as they were, practiced, at the time of the Prophet. Somebody said the prayer, is as it was. Anas said, have you not done in the prayer what you have done? Narrated Az-Zuri that he visited Anas bin Malik at Damascus and found him weeping and asked him why he was weeping. He replied, I do not know anything which I used to know during the lifetime of Allah's Apostle except this prayer which is being lost, not offered as it should be. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 508. Narrated by Anas, the Prophet said, whenever any one of you offers his prayer, he is speaking in private to his Lord. So he should not spit to his right but under his left foot. Qatada said, he should not spit in front of him but to his left or under his feet. And Shubi'a said, he should not spit in front of him, nor to his right but to his left or under his foot. Anas said, the Prophet said, he should neither spit in the direction of his Qibla nor to his right but to his left or under his foot. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 509. Narrated by Anas, the Prophet said, do the prostration properly and do not put your forearms flat with elbows touching the ground like a dog. And if you want to spit, do not spit in front, nor to the right, for the person in prayer is speaking in private to his Lord. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 510. Narrated by Abu Huraira and Abdullah bin Umar, Allah's Apostle said, if it is very hot, then pray the Zuhr prayer when it becomes a bit cooler, as the severity of the heat is from the raging of the hell fire. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 511. Narrated by Abu Dhar, the Mu'adhin, call maker, of the Prophet pronounced the Adhan, call, for the Zuhr prayer, but the Prophet said, let it be cooler, let it be cooler. Or said, wait, wait, because the severity of heat is from the raging of the hell fire. In severe hot weather, pray when it becomes a bit cooler and the shadows of hillocks appear. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 512. Narrated by Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, in very hot weather delay the Zuhr prayer till it becomes a bit cooler, because the severity of heat is from the raging of hell fire. The hell fire of hell complained to its Lord, saying, O Lord, my parts are eating, destroying one another. So Allah allowed it to take 2 breaths, one in the winter and the other in the summer. The breath in the summer is at the time when you feel the severest heat, and the breath in the winter is at the time when you feel the severest cold. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 513. Narrated by Abu Sa'id, that Allah's Apostle said, pray Zuhr prayer when it becomes a bit cooler, as the severity of heat is from the raging of the hell-fire. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 514. Narrated by Abu Dhar al-Ghifar, we were with the Prophet on a journey, and the mu'adhin, call maker for the prayer, wanted to pronounce the adhan, call, for the Zuhr prayer. The Prophet said, let it become cooler. He again, after a while, wanted to pronounce the adhan, but the Prophet said to him, let it become cooler till we see the shadows of hillocks. The Prophet added, the severity of heat is from the raging of the hell-fire, and in very hot weather pray, Zuhr, when it becomes cooler. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 515. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, Allah's Apostle came out as the sun declined at midday and offered the Zuhr prayer. He then stood on the pulpit and spoke about the hour, day of judgment, and said that in it there would be tremendous things. He then said, whoever likes to ask me about anything he can do so, and I shall reply as long as I am at this place of mine. Most of the people wept, and the Prophet said repeatedly, ask me. Abdullah bin Hudhafa as-Sami stood up and said, who is my father? The Prophet said, your father is Hudhafa. The Prophet repeatedly said, ask me. Then Umar knelt before him and said, we are pleased with Allah as our Lord, Islam as our religion, and Muhammad as our Prophet. The Prophet then became quiet and said, paradise and hellfire were displayed in front of me on this wall just now, and I have never seen a better thing than the former, and a worse thing than the latter. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 516. Narrated by Abu al-Minhal, Abu Barza said, the Prophet used to offer the Fajr prayer, when one could recognize the person sitting by him, after the prayer, and he used to recite between 60 to 100 ayat, verses, of the Quran. He used to offer the Zuhr prayer as soon as the sun declined, at noon, and the Asr at a time when a man might go and return from the farthest place in Medina and find the sun still hot. The sub-narrator forgot what was said about the Maghrib. He did not mind delaying the Isha prayer to 1/3 of the night or the middle of the night. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 517. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, when we offered the Zuhr prayers behind Allah's Apostle, we used to prostrate on our clothes to protect ourselves from the heat. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 518. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, the Prophet prayed 8 rakat for the Zuhr and Asr, and 7 for the Maghrib and Isha prayers in Medina. Ayyub said, perhaps those were rainy nights. Anas said, maybe. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 519. Narrated by Aisha, Allah's Apostle used to offer the Asr prayer when the sunshine had not disappeared from my chamber. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 520. Narrated by Aisha, Allah's Apostle used to offer the Asr prayers at a time when the sunshine was still inside my chamber and no shadow had yet appeared in it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 521. Narrated by Aisha, the Prophet used to pray the Asr prayers at a time when the sunshine was still inside my chamber and no shadow had yet appeared in it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 522. Narrated by Siyar bin Salama, I along with my father went to Abu Barza al-Aslani, and my father asked him, how Allah's Apostle used to offer the 5 compulsory congregational prayers. Abu Barza said, The Prophet used to pray the Zuhr prayer, which you, people, call the first one at midday when the sun had just declined, the Asr prayer at a time when after the prayer, a man could go to the house at the farthest place in Medina, and arrive, while the sun was still hot. I forgot about the Maghrib prayer. The Prophet loved to delay the Isha, which you call al-Adama, and he disliked sleeping before it and speaking after it. After the Fajr prayer he used to leave when a man could recognize the one sitting beside him, and he used to recite between 60 to 100 ayat, in the Fajr prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 523. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, we used to pray the Asr prayer, and after that if someone happened to go to the tribe of Bani Amr bin Auf, he would find them still praying the Asr prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 524. Narrated by Abu Bakr bin Uthman bin Sal bin Hunayf, that he heard Abu Umama saying, "We prayed the Zuhr prayer with Umar bin Abdul Aziz and then went to Anas bin Malik and found him offering the Asr prayer. I asked him, 'O uncle, which prayer have you offered?' He said, 'The Asr, and this is the time of the prayer of Allah's apostle which we used to pray with him.'" Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 525. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, Allah's apostle used to offer the Asr prayer at a time when the sun was still hot and high, and if a person went to Al-Awali, a place of Medina, he would reach there when the sun was still high. Some of Al-Awali of Medina were about 4 miles or so from the town. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 526. Narrated by Anas bin Malik, we used to pray the Asr, and after that if one of us went to Quba he would arrive there while the sun was still high. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 527. Narrated by Ibn Umar, Allah's apostle said, "Whoever misses the Asr prayer, intentionally, then it is as if he lost his family and property." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 528. Narrated by Abu al-Ma, we were with Buraida in a battle on a cloudy day, and he said, "Offer the Asr prayer early, as the Prophet said, whoever leaves the Asr prayer, all his good deeds will be annulled." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 529. Narrated by Qais, Jarir said, "We were with the Prophet and he looked at the full moon and said, 'Certainly you will see your Lord as you see this moon, and you will have no trouble in seeing him. So if you can avoid missing, through sleep or business, etc., a prayer before the sunrise, Fajr, and a prayer before sunset, Asr, you must do so.'" He then recited Allah's statement, "And celebrate the praises of your Lord before the rising of the sun and before its setting." 50.39, Ismail said, "Offer those prayers and do not miss them." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 530. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's apostle said, "Angels come to you in succession by night and day, and all of them get together at the time of the Fajr and Asr prayers. Those who have passed the night with you, or stayed with you, ascend to the heaven, and Allah asks them, though He knows everything about you, 'Well, in what state did you leave my slaves?' The angels reply, 'When we left them they were praying, and when we reached them, they were praying.'" Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 531. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's apostle said, "If any one of you can get 1 rak'ah of the Asr prayer before sunset, he should complete his prayer. If any of you can get 1 rak'ah of the Fajr prayer before sunrise, he should complete his prayer." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 532. Narrated by Salim bin Abdullah, my father said, I heard Allah's apostle saying, the period of your stay as compared to the previous nations is like the period equal to the time between the Asr prayer and sunset. The people of the Torah were given the Torah and they acted upon it till midday, then they were exhausted and were given 1 kirat of gold each. And then the people of the gospel were given the gospel and they acted upon it till the Asr prayer, then they were exhausted and were given 1 kirat each. And then we were given the Quran and we acted upon it till sunset, and we were given 2 kirats each. On that the people of both the scriptures said, O our Lord, you have given them 2 kirats and given us 1 kirat, though we have worked more than they. Allah said, have I usurped some of your right? They said, no. Allah said, that is my blessing I bestow upon whomsoever I wish. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 533. Narrated by Abu Musa, the Prophet said, the example of Muslims, Jews, and Christians is like the example of a man who employed laborers to work for him from morning till night. They worked till midday and they said, we are not in need of your reward. So the man employed another batch and said to them, complete the rest of the day and yours will be the wages I had fixed for the first batch. They worked up till the time of the Asr prayer and said, whatever we have done is for you. He employed another batch. They worked for the rest of the day till sunset, and they received the wages of the 2 former batches. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 534. Narrated by Rafi bin Khadij, we used to offer the Maghrib prayer with the Prophet, and after finishing the prayer one of us may go away and could still see as far as the spots where one's arrow might reach when shot by a bow. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 535. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, the Prophet used to pray the Zuhr at midday, and the Asr at a time when the sun was still bright, the Maghrib after sunset, at its stated time, and the Isha at a variable time. Whenever he saw the people assembled for Isha prayer, he would pray earlier, and if the people delayed, he would delay the prayer. And they or the Prophet used to offer the Fajr prayers when it's still dark. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 536. Narrated by Salama, we used to pray the Maghrib prayer with the Prophet when the sun disappeared from the horizon. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 537. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, the Prophet prayed 7 rakat together and 8 rakat together. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 538. Narrated by Abdullah al-Muzani, the Prophet said, do not be influenced by Bedouins regarding the name of your Maghrib prayer which is called Isha by them. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 539. Narrated by Abdullah, one night Allah's Apostle led us in the Isha prayer, and that is the one called Al-Atma by the people. After the completion of the prayer, he faced us and said, do you know the importance of this night? Nobody present on the surface of the earth tonight will be living after 100 years from this night. See Hadith number 575. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 540. Narrated by Muhammad bin Amr, we asked Jabir bin Abdullah about the prayers of the Prophet. He said, he used to pray Zuhr prayer at midday, the Asr when the sun was still hot, and the Maghrib after sunset, at its stated time. The Isha was offered early if the people gathered, and used to be delayed if their number was less, and the morning prayer was offered when it was still dark. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 541. Narrated by Aisha, Allah's apostle once delayed the Isha prayer, and that was during the days when Islam still had not spread. The Prophet did not come out till Umar informed him that the women and children had slept. Then he came out and said to the people of the mosque, none amongst the dwellers of the earth has been waiting for it, Isha prayer, except you. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 542. Narrated by Abu Musa, my companions, who came with me in the boat, and I landed at a place called Baki Buthan. The Prophet was in Medina at that time. One of us used to go to the Prophet by turns every night at the time of the Isha prayer. Once I along with my companions went to the Prophet, and he was busy in some of his affairs, so the Isha prayer was delayed to the middle of the night. He then came out and led the people in prayer. After finishing from the prayer, he addressed the people present there, saying, "Be patient. Don't go away. Have the glad tiding. It is from the blessing of Allah upon you that none amongst mankind has prayed at this time save you." Or said, "None except you has prayed at this time." Abu Musa added, "So we returned happily after what we heard from Allah's apostle." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 543. Narrated by Abu Barza, Allah's apostle disliked to sleep before the Isha prayer and to talk after it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 544. Narrated by Ibn Shihab from Urway, Aisha said, once Allah's apostle delayed the Isha prayer till Umar reminded him by saying, "The prayer. The women and children have slept." Then the Prophet came out and said, "None amongst the dwellers of the earth has been waiting for it, the prayer, except you." Urway said, "Nowhere except in Medina the prayer used to be offered, in those days." He further said, "The Prophet used to offer the Isha prayer in the period between the disappearance of the twilight and the end of the first third of the night." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 545. Narrated by Ibn Jurayy from Nafi, Abdullah bin Umar said, once Allah's apostle was busy, at the time of the Isha, so the prayer was delayed so much so that we slept and woke up and slept and woke up again. The Prophet came out and said, "None amongst the dwellers of the earth but you have been waiting for the prayer." Ibn Umar did not find any harm in praying it earlier or in delaying it unless he was afraid that sleep might overwhelm him and he might miss the prayer, and sometimes he used to sleep before the Isha prayer. Ibn Jurayy said, "I said to Atta, I heard Ibn Abbas saying, once Allah's apostle delayed the Isha prayer to such an extent that the people slept and got up and slept again and got up again. Then Umar bin al-Khattab stood up and reminded the Prophet of the prayer." Atta said, Ibn Abbas said, "The Prophet came out as if I was looking at him at this time, and water was trickling from his head and he was putting his hand on his head and then said, hadn't I thought it hard for my followers, I would have ordered them to pray, Isha prayer, at this time." I asked Atta for further information, how the Prophet had kept his hand on his head as he was told by Ibn Abbas. Atta separated his fingers slightly and put their tips on the side of the head, brought the fingers downwards approximating them till the thumb touched the lobe of the ear at the side of the temple and the beard on the face. He neither slowed nor hurried in this action, but he acted like that. The Prophet said, "Hadn't I thought it hard for my followers, I would have ordered them to pray at this time." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 546. Narrated by Anas, the Prophet delayed the Isha prayer till midnight and then he offered the prayer and said, "The people prayed and slept, but you have been in prayer as long as you have been waiting for it, the prayer." Anas added, "As if I am looking now at the glitter of the ring of the Prophet on that night." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 547. Narrated by Jarir bin Abdullah, we were with the Prophet on a full moon night. He looked at the moon and said, you will certainly see your Lord as you see this moon, and there will be no trouble in seeing him. So if you can avoid missing, through sleep, business, etc., a prayer before the rising of the sun, Fajr, and before its setting, Asr, you must do so. He, the Prophet, then recited the following verse. And celebrate the praises of your Lord before the rising of the sun and before its setting. 50.39 Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 548. Narrated by Abu Bakr bin Abi Musa, my father said, Allah's apostle said, whoever prays the two cool prayers, Asr and Fajr, will go to paradise. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 549. Narrated by Anas, Zayd bin Thabit said, we took the suhur, the meal taken before dawn while fasting is observed, with the Prophet and then stood up for the morning prayer. I asked him how long the interval between the two, suhur and prayer, was. He replied, the interval between the two was just sufficient to recite 50 to 6th ayat. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 550. Narrated by Qatada, Anas bin Malik said, the Prophet and Zayd bin Thabit took the suhur together, and after finishing the meal, the Prophet stood up and prayed, Fajr prayer. I asked Anas, how long was the interval between finishing their suhur and starting the prayer? He replied, the interval between the two was just sufficient to recite 50 ayat. Verses of the Quran. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 551. Narrated by Sal bin Said, I used to take the suhur meal with my family and hasten so as to catch the Fajr, morning prayer, with Allah's Apostle. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 552. Narrated by Aisha, the believing women covered with their veiling sheets used to attend the Fajr prayer with Allah's Apostle, and after finishing the prayer they would return to their home and nobody could recognize them because of darkness. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 553. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's Apostle said, whoever could get one rak'ah of the Fajr prayer before sunrise, he has got the morning prayer, and whoever could get one rak'ah of the Asr prayer before sunset, he has got the Asr prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 554. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's Apostle said, whoever could get one rak'ah of a prayer, in its proper time, he has got the prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 555. Narrated by Umar, the Prophet forbade praying after the Fajr prayer till the sun rises and after the Asr prayer till the sun sets. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 556. Narrated by Ibn Abbas, some people told me the same narration, as above. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 557. Narrated by Hisham's father, Ibn Umar said, Allah's Apostle said, do not pray at the time of sunrise and at the time of sunset. Ibn Umar said, Allah's Apostle said, if the edge of the sun appears above the horizon, delay the prayer till it becomes high, and if the edge of the sun disappears, delay the prayer till it sets, disappears completely. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 558. Narrated by Abu Huraira, Allah's Apostle forbade two kinds of sales, two kinds of dresses, and two prayers. he forbade offering prayers after the Fajr prayer till the rising of the sun and after the Asr prayer till its setting. He also forbade ishtimalasama and alatiba in one garment in such a way that one's private parts are exposed towards the sky. He also forbade the sails called munabadha and mulamasa. See Hadith number 354 and 355 Volume 3. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 559. Narrated by Ibn Umar, Allah's Apostle said, "None of you should try to pray at sunrise or sunset." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 560. Narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, I heard Allah's Apostle saying, "There is no prayer after the morning prayer till the sun rises, and there is no prayer after the Asr prayer till the sun sets." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 561. Narrated by Muawiyah, you offer a prayer which I did not see being offered by Allah's Apostle when we were in his company, and he certainly had forbidden it, i.e. 2 rakat after the Asr prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 562. Narrated by Abu Hurairah, Allah's Apostle forbade the offering of 2 prayers. 1 after the morning prayer till the sun rises. 2 after the Asr prayer till the sun sets. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 563. Narrated by Ibn Umar, I pray as I saw my companions praying. I do not forbid praying at any time during the day or night except at sunset and sunrise. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 564. Narrated by Aisha, by Allah, who took away the Prophet. The Prophet never missed them, 2 rakat, after the Asr prayer till he met Allah, and he did not meet Allah till it became heavy for him to pray while standing, so he used to offer most of the prayers while sitting. She meant the 2 rakat after Asr, he used to pray them in the house and never prayed them in the mosque lest it might be hard for his followers, and he loved what was easy for them. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 565. Narrated by Hisham's father, Aisha, addressing me, said, "O son of my sister, the Prophet never missed 2 prostrations, i.e. rakat, after the Asr prayer in my house." Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 566. Narrated by Aisha, Allah's Apostle never missed 2 rakat before the Fajr prayer and after the Asr prayer openly and secretly. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 567. Narrated by Aisha, whenever the Prophet come to me after the Asr prayer, he always prayed 2 rakat. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 568. Narrated by Ibn Abu Mala, I was with Buraida on a cloudy day and he said, "Offer the Asr prayer earlier, as the Prophet said, whoever leaves the Asr prayer will have all his good deeds annulled." See Hadith number 527 and 528. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 569. Narrated by Abdullah bin Abi Qatada, my father said, one night we were traveling with the Prophet and some people said, "We wish that Allah's Apostle would take a rest along with us during the last hours of the night." He said, "I am afraid that you will sleep and miss the Fajr prayer." Bilal said, "I will make you get up." So all slept, and Bilal rested his back against his rahila, and he too was overwhelmed by sleep, and slept. The Prophet got up when the edge of the sun had risen and said, "O Bilal, what about your statement?" He replied, "I have never slept such a sleep." The Prophet said, "Allah captured your souls when he wished, and released them when he wished." O Bilal, get up and pronounce the adhan for the prayer. The Prophet performed ablution, and when the sun came up and became bright, he stood up and prayed. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 570. Narrated by Jabir bin Abdullah, on the day of Al-Khandak, the Battle of Trench, Umar bin al-Khattab came cursing the disbelievers of Quraysh after the sun had set and said, O Allah's Apostle, I could not offer the Asr prayer till the sun had set. The Prophet said, By Allah, I, too, have not prayed. So we turned towards Buthan, and the Prophet performed ablution, and we too performed ablution and offered the Asr prayer after the sun had set, and then he offered the Maghrib prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 571. Narrated by Anas, the Prophet said, If anyone forgets a prayer, he should pray that prayer when he remembers it. There is no expiation except to pray the same. Then he recited, Establish prayer for my, i.e. Allah's, remembrance. 20.14. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 572. Narrated by Jabir, Umar came cursing the disbelievers of Quraysh on the day of Al-Khandak, the Battle of Trench, and said, I could not offer the Asr prayer till the sun had set. Then we went to Buthan, and he offered the Asr prayer after sunset, and then he offered the Maghrib prayer. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 573. Narrated by Abu al-Minhal, my father and I went to Abi Barza al-Islami, and my father said to him, Tell us how Allah's Apostle used to offer the compulsory congregational prayers. He said, he used to pray the Zuhr prayer, which you call the first prayer, as the sun declined at noon, the Asr at a time when one of us could go to his family at the farthest place in Medina while the sun was still hot. The narrator forgot what Abu Barza had said about the Maghrib prayer, and the Prophet preferred to pray the Isha late and disliked to sleep before it or talk after it. And he used to return after finishing the morning prayer at such a time when it was possible for one to recognize the person sitting by his side, and he, the Prophet, used to recite 60 to 100 ayat, verses, of the Quran in it. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 574. Narrated by Qurra bin Khalid, once he waited for Al-Hasan and he did not show up till it was about the usual time for him to start his speech, then he came and apologized, saying, Our neighbors invited us. Then he added, narrated Anas, once we waited for the Prophet till it was midnight or about midnight. He came and led the prayer, and after finishing it, he addressed us and said, All the people prayed and then slept, and you had been in prayer as long as you were waiting for it. Al-Hasan said, The people are regarded as performing good deeds as long as they are waiting for doing good deeds. Al-Hasan's statement is a portion of Anas's hadith from the Prophet. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 575. Narrated by Abdullah bin Umar, the Prophet prayed one of Dhul-Shah prayer in his last days, and after finishing it with Taslim, he stood up and said, Do you realize the importance of this night? Nobody present on the surface of the earth tonight would be living after the completion of 100 years from this night. The people made a mistake in grasping the meaning of the statement of Allah's Apostle, and they indulged in those things which are said about these narrators, i.e. some said that the day of resurrection will be established after 100 years, etc. But the Prophet said, Nobody present on the surface of earth tonight would be living after the completion of 100 years from this night. He meant when that century, people of that century, would pass away. Sahih Bukhari Volume 1, Book 10, Hadith number 576. Narrated by Abu Uthman, Abdurrahman bin Abi Bakr said, The Sufa companions were poor people, and the Prophet said, whoever has food for 2 persons should take a third one from them, Sufa companions. And whosoever has food for 4 persons he should take 1 or 2 from them. Abu Bakr took 3 men and the Prophet took 10 of them. Abdur Rahman added, my father, my mother and I were there, in the house. The sub-narrator is in doubt whether Abdur Rahman also said, my wife and our servant, who was common for both my house and Abu Bakr's house. Abu Bakr took his supper with the Prophet and remained there till the Isha prayer was offered. Abu Bakr went back and stayed with the Prophet till the Prophet took his meal, and then Abu Bakr returned to his house after a long portion of the night had passed. Abu Bakr's wife said, what detained you from your guests, or guest? He said, have you not served them yet? She said, they refused to eat until you come. The food was served for them but they refused. Abdur Rahman added, I went away and hid myself, being afraid of Abu Bakr, and in the meantime he, Abu Bakr, called me, O Gunthar, a harsh word, and also called me bad names and abused me, and then said, to his family, eat. No welcome for you. Then, the supper was served. Abu Bakr took an oath that he would not eat that food. The narrator added, by Allah, whenever any one of us, myself and the guests of Sufa companions, took anything from the food, it increased from underneath. We all ate to our fill and the food was more than it was before its serving. Abu Bakr looked at it, the food, and found it as it was before serving, or even more than that. He addressed his wife, saying, O the sister of Bani Firas, what is this? She said, O the pleasure of my eyes. The food is now 3 times more than it was before. Abu Bakr ate from it, and said, that oath was from Satan, meaning his oath not to eat. Then he again took a morsel, mouthful, from it, and then took the rest of it to the Prophet. So that meal was with the Prophet. There was a treaty between us and some people, and when the period of that treaty had elapsed, the Prophet divided us into 12 groups, the Prophet's companions, each being headed by a man. Allah knows how many men were under the command of each leader. So all of them, 12 groups of men, ate of that meal.